This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by Opsgenie by Atlassian. With Opsgenie, your next incident doesn't stand a chance. Visit Opsgenie.com for your free account. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we get to visit this time with an old friend who has a new Take Control book. Or is it? It's sort of a continuation of a Take Control book, but we'll find out about that in a minute. Mr. Jason Snell is back. Jason, welcome. It's great to see you.
Hi, Chuck. It's great to be back.
I love the lava lamp. I have to say that out on camera. I love the lava lamp.
It's not a smart switch, so it's a smart lava lamp.
Ooh.
I didn't warm it up for you though, so nothing's moving around in there right now. It's going to take like an hour for all the stuff to start blobbing around in there.
No, that's all right. It's just a nice touch. I like it. Well, of course, we're here to talk about your new book, which is Take Control of Photos, the Photos app, the app by Apple. But it is a new Take Control title, but it's a continuation of what were previously one of the Crash Course titles.
Yeah, I mean, most people probably don't care, but we used to be. They did these books called these Crash Course books. They were lots of screenshots, lots of images with captions, not as much in the way of actual words, and that was the format that I was asked to do by Tanya and Adam Angst when they were doing Take Control, and so I was like, all right, we'll do that. And then when Joe Kissel took over Take Control, he decided that he was going to put that one to bed and just go back to the standard format because it was, I have to say, as a writer, it was a labor-intensive format. It was mostly layout. I was mostly just writing words to fill in the captions, and it was an interesting challenge because it was a very densely kind of put together thing. But I really feel like in our current era, the way people consume information, having something that's sort of like layout based, it's just like not what people are doing anymore. And this is now I was going to say back, but it never was before. It is now a Take Control book, so it's got paragraphs and there are images throughout, but they're not. It just kind of flows through the chapter instead of it being kind of like these individual pages that were laid out in a very particular way, which was great if you looked at the PDF, but I think most people are not maybe consuming content by looking at individual pages of a PDF anymore. So we converted it. I wrote a lot more paragraphs and expanded out a lot of stuff that I had previously had to kind of like shoehorn in a caption or a paragraph here or there. And then, of course, I have to update it for Mojave, and not a lot in Photos in Mojave, but there's a lot in iOS 12. So a bunch of updated stuff. And then, of course, Apple killed all of its physical photo gift, basically books and calendars that used to be built inside of Photos, and they killed that. And so I had to write about the new extension apps that have come out to let you do that instead.
I so badly want to go down the road of having a discussion about how people consume information now, but I'm making a note on that. We'll get back to that in another show.
I just feel like we're in an ebook era. Is sort of what I mean is that these days people expect it to be on iBooks or in an EPUB format that they can load on their book reader or their Kindle or their iPad or their iPhone. And that was our challenge in Macworld back in the day when we went from having these, on print, you've got these carefully laid out pages. And on the web, you just have text and it just scrolls. And I think the truth is that almost every place people are reading now is a scrolling line of text that is, owes its lineage to the web if it is not actually HTML, which in a lot of cases it is. Even EPUBs are kind of HTML in the background. And so building those crash courses felt a little bit it really was old school for me. It felt like building magazine pages again. And I just don't think most people are consuming that content in that way.
Interesting. Well, I was really pleased to see that the Photos book got this much love and got this kind of expansion. And maybe it's just my perception, but it sometimes feels like Photos just gets overlooked by way too many people in favor of Photoshop and Affinity Photo and Acorn and all the other photo enhancement and manipulation tools. And yet photos can do so much if you just take the time to dig a little bit. And so that makes this book the perfect thing to dig with.
Yeah, it's a very capable program. Every time I write about it, I have somebody also say, well, but Google Photos is free. It's like, yeah, it is. I'm not writing a book about which photo service you should use. I'm not writing a book about photos versus Google Photo, iCloud Photos versus Google Photos. The fact is, Apple has as its first party preferred way to deal with photography on iOS and Mac. It has an app. That Photos is it. It is way capable, way more capable than it used to be. It is a very capable image cataloger. You can organize your photos. You can build albums. You can share stuff. There's some new sharing settings that are good. And it's got a lot of editing tools. Over the last couple of years, they really have spent a lot of time the last few years, and I've noted this because I have to update my book every year, adding to their editing features. And of course, now they also actually have support for external editing, which means if you want to edit a photo in Photoshop, you can just do a keyboard shortcut or a menu item, and it'll automatically open in, that app in Photoshop or Acorn or whatever else. And when you save it and close it, it pops it right back into the Photos library. So inside and out, they have really improved it over the last few years. It's come a long way. It's not for everybody, and there are lots of alternatives out there. But I feel like because it is the first party feature, it is the core operating system photo library, essentially, especially on iOS, but even on the Mac, it's the thing that Apple has built. And they've done a pretty good job. And I think I think there are areas where it's behind, but I think there are also things that, as a Mac user, especially, that I really prefer. Ultimately, the reason I don't use Google Photos more than any other is not hatred or suspicion of Google so much as I'm not interested in having my only access to my photo library on my computer be a web page. And that's how Google Photos works. And I'm not interested in that. I would much rather have an app. And Google is not interested in building a Mac app as a front end to Google Photos. But Apple, would Apple be today? I don't know. But they built one, and it's Photos, and we use it. So I'm also using this myself. This isn't just a book that I'm writing, and then in my secret spare time, I go over to Lightroom or something like that. All my family photo library is in iCloud Photos and in the Photos app.
So one of the things that you make the promo for the book makes a big deal out of is that you talk about how to migrate from Aperture, which used to be one of Apple's photo programs. And I used Aperture. I migrated away from it a long time ago. But how do you feel about Photos and the way Photos is now versus the way Aperture was when it was deprecated? Do we have parity yet?
No, and we never will. I think the truth is that at the time when Apple announced that Photos was going to exist, they were using Photos as a way to explain away the deprecation of Aperture and iPhoto. And although there are more Aperture-like features in Photos than ever were in iPhoto, if you're somebody who uses Aperture even now on some older operating system, you should probably use Lightroom. Like that is what you should use, because that's the same class of tool. Literally, Lightroom and Aperture were direct parallels to one another. Photos is a more advanced iPhoto. That's what it is. And so in the book, I feel like we will reach a point at some point where I'm going to pull out all of the content about migrating from iPhoto and Aperture, because everybody will have done that. But it's still in there. It's unchanged because there's nothing to change. iPhoto and Aperture haven't changed and won't change. Basically, it'll load those libraries up and convert them into Photos libraries, and then you can keep using them. But beyond that, I mean, it really is just the question of, is there anybody left who's sort of like holding on to, you'll take my iPhoto when you take it from my cold dead hands? And if so, then, Apple has made it very easy to move from those. But every year when my book gets updated, those sections get smaller.
Okay, so if we're not going to have parity, then the question I have to ask you, since you've written the book on Photos, is do people really need, most people, not the photo professionals, but most people, do they really need those hooks for external editors and all? Or do you feel like most people can get everything they need within Photos on iOS or the Mac?
There's definitely stuff. I mean, I pay for Photoshop and I use Photoshop. And I don't, generally use it to touch up most of my home photos, but there are cases where I have those moments where I think I really should use the stamp tool, the clone tool. There's a repair brush in Photos that works pretty well. I had a photo that I posted on my Six Colors website. Excuse me. That was an iPad, a new iPad, and had some dust on it. I was like, oh boy. And I actually just used Photos to retouch all that dust out. And that retouching brush did it fine, works great on blemishes on skin. Really works well. There are a few instances, though, where I noticed when doing the iPad retouching, where I wanted to trace the edge. Like this was a clean edge over here, and there was a dusty edge over here, and I wanted to trace that edge I was thinking of it like the rubber stamp tool on Photoshop. And I thought it doesn't work that way. Photos doesn't work that way. It's not built for that level of precision. It's a retouching tool. It's not a clone tool in the same sense. And so really, it comes down to how you use it. I think for most people who are just keeping their family photo libraries and organizing them and sending them to friends and things like that, I think this is perfectly suitable. The nice thing about it is if you do have an external editor that you like and you need to kick over into it, it's going to round trip that stuff for you now in a way that it didn't before, that you can, edit in the external editor and then save it and close it. And then those edits get swept back into Photos that get synced back with iCloud, and you get to take advantage of that while still having your original saved away just in case you need to revert to it. So, it's there if you need it. I would say that most people won't need it, but it's nice that it's there.
That was going to be one of the questions, and you just answered it, that when you're using those external programs, it's non-destructive. So you still have the original if you need to go back to it.
Yeah, it's basically, the way it works is that Photos has this concept that there's the original and there's whatever the current working copy is, and that it doesn't call it that, but that's what it is. And so if you edit, if you edit, a lot of the edits in Photos are non-destructive, not the repair stuff. The repair stuff, you're retouching individual items, but like a lot of the color correction and things like that, those are all non-destructive. They're basically layers. They're adjustment layers in, I think, Photoshop terms. And so you can turn them off. If you don't like them, you just turn them off, and then they're gone. Like, it's when you go out to an external editor, it's going to send the existing whatever, including those adjustments. It's basically going to burn in everything into a flat image that is the new current working copy, and pass that off to Photoshop or whatever, Acorn, Pixelmator, you name it, Affinity. And this is all on the Mac. There's much less in terms of extensions on iOS. And then you can do all your work in that external editor, and then you press save, and Photos knows that you saved it and closed it, and it brings that back in as the current working copy. So it's still got the original, and it's still got the current working copy, which came out of Photoshop, let's say. What it doesn't have is all those other layers of things you can switch on and off. Like all those effects you put on are burned in now. So you can't turn them off. If you want to go back, there's sort of no layers of undo is basically the way to think of it. So you can revert to the original. You always can do that. But what you can't do is like mix and match between external editor and some stuff that's non-destructive that's in Photos. You can edit it in Photos again and then add more non-destructive layers on top, but it will be starting from that copy that came back from the external editor.
Got it. Makes sense.
Yeah, but the nice thing is it's in your library. It's going to sync. It appears in the right place. It's got the right metadata. And yes, if you decide that what you don't like what it has become, you can revert it back to how it started.
Opsgenie by Atlassian is sponsoring today's MacVoices. Getting alerts immediately is critical when an incident occurs. But that's not enough. Getting them to the right people, the people who can really make a difference, is what matters. That's why you need Opsgenie from Atlassian. Opsgenie lets you and your team respond to incidents the right way, the efficient way. Engineers get the engineering notices. Operations get the operations notices, not the other way around. Your team members on the East Coast get East Coast notifications, while your team in London get London notifications. So problems get resolved quickly by the team members who can handle them. I just logged on to a financial services site the other day, or tried to. It didn't load for an unusually long period of time, and then I got a database error message. Needless to say, I wasn't impressed. The site remained in that state for a good 30 minutes. Now that doesn't sound like much, but those were 30 minutes that I was an unhappy customer. And they were 30 minutes I spent thinking about moving to the competition. I'm sure that site wasn't using Opsgenie. If they had been, the right team members would have known, and as the downtime stretched beyond a few minutes, the issues would have been escalated so more resources could be dedicated to the problem. That's what Opsgenie lets you do for your customers. You don't know when your next incident will occur. Be ready when it does by visiting Opsgenie.com right now, sign up for a free account, and add up to 5 team members free. See what Opsgenie can do for you. That's Opsgenie from Atlassian at Opsgenie.com. Never miss a critical alert again with Opsgenie. Thanks to Opsgenie and Atlassian for sponsoring this week's MacVoices.
When we started, you mentioned the fact that Apple has dropped their books and calendars and cards and everything. How are you finding the implementation of what they've done so that you can use other services with that? And I would also be remiss if I didn't ask you why you think Apple decided to do this, since they have such high quality products.
So I think that I think Apple built this extension structure a while ago, and I think for the last year they kind of have been evangelizing it and saying, "Oh well, here's a good idea. You should do this." And I think very few. There were some. I think maybe the last 2 years there have been some users of these extensions, but it's been very limited. And I think Apple doesn't actually do this, right? Apple didn't print these books. Apple worked with external printers to do it. I think Apple just wanted to be out of the business of being a middleman between their internal software and their external printers. I think it's possible that the printers were kind of putting pressure on them and their customers too to make the book building and calendar building experiences better. And Apple wasn't really interested, I think, in prioritizing that either. They probably saw sales fall off. I'm sure they were taking a percentage, right, of all the sales that they were sending to their printers. I think they just wanted to simplify and get out of that business. And their thought was, why don't we just give some tools to our third-party partners to build their own tools, and then they can do that, and anyone can do that. In practice, what has happened is that now that they have announced that, people realized, oh, we need to get on this. We can't this isn't just a theory. There's money to be made, because those people who are using Apple services are going to have to go somewhere else, and maybe they can go to us. And what we've gotten is 2 companies, both of whom Apple has used as a printing partner in the background. So even though you ordered from Apple and you get it and it says it's from Apple, there's somebody else in the background. And so Mimeo Photos and Motif are the 2 extensions for Photos for Mac that do calendars and books. And both of those companies printed calendars and books for Apple in the past. So it very much is. In fact, I think it's is it Mimeo Photos that is trying to replicate the very same templates. And I think Mimeo Photos will let you even take a PDF archive of your Apple book that you built that is no longer supported. And if you upload that production PDF that you can get out of Photos, which is not something that I mentioned in the book because it's super esoteric, but it is you can option click on the what is the save button or the buy button in an Apple book project and save out this production PDF. If you send that to Mimeo, they will basically replicate your old Apple book and print you a new copy. So they're definitely trying to reach, with the templates especially, people who are used to building those books for Apple. And the Motif, I believe, is the one that's from our Donnelly, which is a big printer. We actually used Donnelly to print the first magazine I worked at. Was printed by Donnelly. So they've been doing a lot of this stuff too, and they built their own app. And they both have their strengths and weaknesses. I'd say both of them are better than Apple stuff in a lot of ways. Calendar, I think Apple's calendar builder was a little bit more flexible, and I liked some of the features that have not been replicated yet. But on the book side, I think these book building plugins, both Motif and Mimeo, are better in that you can basically edit the templates. One of them lets you free float photo boxes. Basically, it's like a mini Quark Express. You could add boxes and add photos to them and move them around and have one under another one so that it sticks out from under. And I mean, all this kind of crazy stuff. And then the other one doesn't go that far, but it does let you take all of the borders between the photos and sort of slide them so you can make sort of this side narrower and this side wider. Which is something that Apple didn't really want you to do. You sort of just had to fill in the blanks. So I made books with both, and I think the books are good, and I think the software is perfectly fine. And I prefer this method to the other method of building books, which is uploading a bunch of photos to a photo printing service, and then like Shutterfly, and then using their web app to build the books. I think this is a better experience than that. Everybody's mileage will vary, but I like the idea that I've got all my photos right there and I can use them right there, and I don't have to deal with upload. Anytime I think I might want to use a photo, having to upload it into the Shutterfly interface in order to get access to it. I don't like that. I would much rather just do it inside Photos where all my photos live.
I have not built a book under the new structure, but I was a little distressed when Apple announced that they were getting out of that business. But now you've made me feel a whole lot better about it because of the fact that the people that you can do it with are the same people Apple was using. So the quality is going to be there.
Yeah, it's basically the same. They're basically the same books. They don't. My friend John Siracusa was really worried that when he was done with the Apple books, that suddenly all the books were going to be different. And I just don't think that's going to be the case, actually. I think you can replicate the Apple book experience, especially if you use Mimeo, since it's got those templates. If you really want to use the same template, they've basically created template lookalikes for the old Apple templates. And although I think Motif is actually a better app for building books than Mimeo is, they're both fine. And they'll get you what you need, and the prices are also fine. The pricing's about the same, and it's pretty comparable with what other sites charge for book building.
Jason, one other thing I want to make sure we touch on, because I still find that I get a lot of response from viewers and listeners whenever the topic of photos and iCloud come up. iCloud photo library, syncing, uploading, when can you do it, how much space is it taking, and all. Is that something you get into some detail in the book with?
Yeah, there's a lot of detail in there about it. It is complicated. It doesn't help that Apple keeps changing things about it. It's not called iCloud Photo Library anymore, which they never actually said, but now it's called iCloud Photos. So there's that. I feel like they're figuring it out in terms of sharing, which is one of my big frustrations. You can now share from iOS. You can share this iCloud photo link, and you can put it on the clipboard, or you can send it in a message. And instead of sending photos to the person, it sends a link to an iCloud page. And if you're on iOS and you tap that link, it actually asks you, would you like to import these photos that this person has shared with you directly into your photo library? And it does that via iCloud at full resolution, which is great because shared albums that they've had for a while aren't at full resolution. They're actually resed down. And if you're on a Mac and you get one of those links, or a PC, it opens a web page and says, I can show you these to you, or you can just download them and put them in your own photo library yourself. It's actually really good. They did a good job. And then they expire after 14 days, I think, something like that. So they're getting there with it. I haven't had an iCloud photo library syncing problem in years. If you've got a lot of photos, you're going to have to pay for the storage space. That's the thing. The Apple, if you want to sync your photos, it's super convenient and I love it, but I am paying Apple for 2 terabytes of iCloud storage because I have a lot of photos. And I think Apple's so when they increased the storage max to 2 terabytes from 1, I basically got double the amount of storage that I used to pay for. That was good. I can use it for other things like iCloud backup. You can now share iCloud storage space with your family, so you only have to buy one. So there are a lot of ways where they're getting better. It's taken way too long to get here, but I think it's actually a good service, and I'm glad that I have it and I take advantage of it all the time. And it's really great to have every single photo in my photo collection available, accessible on my iPhone at the drop of a hat anywhere I am. That's pretty great.
Another thing that interested me, and I have to admit, I have not done a lot of this. In fact, I probably am limited to using the screensaver feature, is using photos or using the Photos apps on or with your Apple TV. And I found that interesting because is there more you can do with it?
Not really.
Don't know.
I mean, the Photos app on Apple TV is more dynamic than the Photos app on the Apple Watch, where it's literally just going to show you your favorites and let you pan around, and pick the ones you want to use on as a background on some of the watch faces. The Apple TV is a little more advanced than that. But yeah, if you build a slideshow, you can, or an album, it's a nice way to get that stuff up onto a TV. And you can just browse from there. I rarely do that. It does happen every now and then that we're sitting around with family or something, and they're like, "Oh, what about this trip that you took?" And you're like, "Oh, we have an album of that. Let me bring that up on the Apple TV." But it's not the most exciting feature, photos on Apple TV, but it's there. It's good that they've got it. For a while, they didn't. They introduced iCloud Photo Library back in the day, and the Photos app on Apple TV didn't support it for I think more than a year. So they've got their act together now.
And I might disagree with you a little because there's something about getting the pictures, and they're great pictures, no matter what you take them with, especially if you take them with an iPhone, that they get up on that big screen and they just command so much more attention than they do on your computer screen or your iPhone screen. And I get comments on, gee, what's that? Where did that come from? How do you do that? And so it's a little thing. It's a real little thing. But if the screensaver pops up, I have it set to my photos and not Apple's, the flyovers that they're doing with everything. And yeah, it's great. It makes me happy.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I use the flyovers there too, instead, because I enjoy those. But yeah, it's there as an option. And then even if you don't use it as a screensaver, the app is right there and it gives you access. Now it will give you access to everything in your library, all of your albums, so that if you can, you can think of it, you can search, you can find it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about iOS 12 and photos. Because again, earlier you said that's where some of the biggest changes have come. What is new with photos in iOS 12?
A couple big things. They have changed one of the tabs in Photos for iOS 12 so that you have access. Basically, they kind of poured a bunch of their machine learning stuff into one place. So it will recommend memories for you or on this day collections in that tab. It will recommend things to be shared. I mentioned that new sharing feature where you can send things to people. It actually is going to look at the faces in photos and the times and the locations and try to make some guesses about, like, you were with these 4 people for this event. Would you like to share those photos with those people? And that can be, I've had ones that have been really dumb, like, you were with your family. Would you like to share these photos with your family? I'm like, no, we've already got them. They're fine. But I have had it be like, here are 2 of your friends that you were with for this weekend. Would you like to share your photos with them? And if you tap that, it'll show all of them, and you can actually select them all, or you can deselect ones you don't want to share. And it sends this iCloud link to them. And if they're on iOS 12, when you get one of those links, your copy of Photos will look at the metadata that's gone along with it and say, oh, do I have photos from that event too? And if you do, it'll say, would you like to share those back to the same group of people? And so when it's all working right and everybody's on iOS 12, and those are a lot of ifs, you can get in the situation where if you've got 3 friends who go away somewhere for the weekend and they come back and one of them gets prompted, oh, you should share with your two buddies that you went away for the weekend. And then the buddies get that, and each of the buddies gets prompted with all the photos they took. And all of a sudden, all three of the buddies have shared all their photos with each other, and they can integrate them into their own libraries. It's pretty good when it works. Again, I think it's going to need a year or two to settle where everybody's kind of got it and it understands it, and maybe Apple makes that a little more obvious. But they are trying to use that feature to connect different people and let people share photos out of their library without explicitly sort of like merging iCloud libraries. And so I think that's a very clever feature that's on that tab. Basically, that's a discovery tab where they're trying to analyze your library and say, here's it's like the For You. I think it is a For You tab. It's very much like the For You tab in Apple Music. It's like you were listening to this, and this happened last year, and you went on this trip. Isn't that a nice memory? And here's this thing that is an event you might want to share. And those all get rolled in there. So that's one. And I'd say the other big one is search. Search is, it kills me that this is not on the Mac, but it's not. So search on iOS now, you can pile up different search queries together, which you couldn't do before, including all of the machine learning analysis that is done on your library. So the example I give in the book is that I did a search for my last dog, not my current dog, but my last dog. I remember we took her skiing with us one time. And that was a lot of fun because she'd never been in snow before. She'd never seen snow. And so I searched for dog in iOS, and I get, 800 pictures of dogs, my dogs, other people's dogs. And then I searched for snow. And it used to be you couldn't do that. You couldn't search for those two terms, those two machine learning analysis terms. But now you can. And I went from 800 dog photos to 2 pictures and a video, actually, that were of my dog as I remembered her in the snow in that one trip we took with her where she got to be in the snow. So, a couple of seconds of typing and I had exactly what I wanted. And I think it's incredibly powerful. And you can search on a person and then a machine learning keyword, a couple of people, a couple of keywords. You can mix and match and stack up the terms and find exactly what you want. And the search results pane is very nice. It shows you sort of like tap here to view all the pictures. It gives you a little preview of some of them. It's a little non-intuitive in the sense that when you type the word, it doesn't automatically like turn that into the category. You need to tap on one of the autofills that basically comes up as this category, and then you tap on it and it adds it. Could be, it's a little bit quirky. You got to get used to it, but it's incredibly powerful, and it makes it so much easier. If you've got thousands or tens of thousands of photos, and you're like, what's that picture I took with my 2 kids at the beach? Or sometimes, honestly, I do it sometimes and say, I want beach pictures with my kids, right? I don't even know what beach, just beach pictures. And I can search for my daughter and my son and beach as a keyword in iOS in like 20 seconds. And it'll say, I have 90 pictures and they are all of my kids on a beach. And that's pretty great. So, Apple does all that analyzing behind the scenes to say this is a picture with this face in it. And it's also a beach, and it's also the ocean, and it's also summer, and all these things that it does. But how do you use that? Well, search is a great way to use it. And before you could only search for one of those terms at a time. And so that alone, like I said, I'm very sad that that's not on the Mac version, but it is on iOS, and it's great. They did a really good job with it.
Jason, go back to the sharing for just a second.
Sure.
So I want to make sure I understand it. So if you and I go away, what's you?
Yeah, you and I visit some friends in Chicago for a gathering, a Mac related gathering in Chicago for a weekend, long weekend, and then we go home, and my iPad will say, "Hey, these are pictures of you and Chuck. You and Chuck were in Chicago this weekend. Would you like to share them with Chuck?" If you're in my contacts, it will have a link directly to share them with you. And then I think you are in my contacts, by the way, Chuck. And then it will, and if I say yes, it will send you like an iMessage or even a text message if you're not on iMessage with a link to an iCloud.com address that is the photos that I've selected and chosen to share to you. And when you tap on it, what happens is different based on if you're on iOS or not. If you're on iOS, photos will open and say, hey, here are all these photos from Jason. Would you like to import them in your photo library? If you're on a Mac or a PC, you'll get a link to a web page that'll show those photos and say, would you like to log in to iCloud Photos and download and add them now, or just download the files? But if you're on iOS, the thing it'll do after that is look in your library to see if you have photos from that same event of me. And it will be in the background, it's going to say, do I see Jason? It may also, even without the presence of my face, it may say, do I see photos from the same time period in this same location? And then it will show those to you and say, hey, here are photos that we think are from the same event. Do you want to share these with Jason? And you can share those back with me. And then suddenly you and I both have photos of our weekend at the Mac event in Chicago.
And you just used the word I wanted, import. So it's not like the expiring photos you were talking about before. Now I've got copies of those photos. You've got copies of my photos, and they are now owned by us.
Yes. So the link expires, but the photos don't. So the idea there is that if you generate a sharing link and give it to somebody, and then their phone gets hacked, and that link gets taken after 14 days or whatever, that link doesn't work anymore. But the photos that you import are there, or you send it to your girlfriend, and then she breaks up with you, and and that will expire. She can't get those photos later in order to, I don't know, deface them and laugh at you or something like that. That was a dark place I went, but I think that's sort of their motivation in doing that, is that there are, friendship and relationship statuses can change, and links can get out and get lost. And so, and Apple doesn't want to hold on to those full quality images in that holding bin anyway. So after 14 days, I think it is, that link dies. But the photos, if you tap on it in those 14 days and import them, then they're yours to keep. They're just your photos then.
And so if your girlfriend has them, and then she can deface them all she wants.
Yeah, that's right. Forever.
Okay.
After that point. But the idea is that you need to, Apple, a lot of these things that Apple does, you have to say, why did they do it that way? Why do they have an expiration date? And oftentimes it is a security thing where they don't want those links to live forever. They want them to be in the moment. It's convenient for me to share this. It's very much like in Apple Mail, how they will let you upload a very large attachment to their servers rather than trying to force it through your mail server. And they upload it to their servers. They insert an iCloud download link in the mail message, and then they send the mail message rather than trying to stick a giant attachment through email. Those also will die after a while because they don't want to hold on to those big files, but they will let them live for a certain amount of time. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. I mean, and like you said, it makes perfect sense if you think about it right. And a lot of us this is all new territory for so many folks. And so it's good that Apple's thinking about some of those things. Now we have to think about them too and figure out why they did it. But yeah, it's the whole machine learning thing is fascinating. The capabilities it's giving you, and the fact that I don't have to remember that we were in Chicago. It knows, or if it thinks it knows, like you said, with the proximity and the location data, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I like the idea that it can intuit. If a machine can have intuition, the idea is it's programmed to say there are groups of faces that are together in a bunch of shots, and if it's in this geographic location and there's a time span, and it uses all that information to try and make a guess about, like, I think an event happened here. And sometimes it doesn't do a very good job, but sometimes it does. Sometimes it'll be like, oh, you were all in Chicago and here are the pictures. And when it does it, it's magic. Now Google is better at this than Apple is, but Apple is getting better at it.
And let's face it, it's only going to get better. The odds are that it's not going to get worse, because the machines are gathering up more information to make these suggestions for you. And in the meantime, the programmers are tuning the algorithms to make it better. So,
Yeah, and this is actually why a lot of times I get questions about photos, and they're about things like manually organizing albums and things like that. And I make albums every now and then, although they're usually for a project. I'll make an album when I'm going through my library for a year to make a calendar or a book. I don't do a lot of albums just for my own edification anymore. I don't do any, honestly. And mostly that's because if I want to see all the photos from a particular location or date or with a person, I can rely on those algorithms. They will have scanned my photos, and that's only going to get better, but it's already good enough that a lot of the manual, I used to be somebody who manually keyworded every photo I took. And I stopped doing that a long time ago because first there was the sort of face scanning in iPhoto, and now it's gone kind of beyond that with this machine learning stuff. And it's great. And it means that you can find that photo without actually, you can have your huge library and you're still going to be able, like in my example, to say, I want a picture of my kids on the beach. I can get that picture. Or my wife and my daughter on the beach. I can get that picture on iOS in, 15 seconds.
Yeah. It's amazing how far we've come, and we still have a long way to go. But so obviously this book can be had at takecontrolbooks.com. What are you guys doing about the transition from the crash course to this? Is this just considered a brand new Take Control title?
It is. I don't know if Joe Kissel is going to email the previous owners of the book with a deal or not. Technically it is a new book, but I will tell you that the origin of it is the old book. And so it is in many ways an updated and expanded version of those crash courses. Because it's a new format, I don't know whether Joe is offering something. I would say that you've probably heard from Take Control if you bought the old version with some sort of offer, whether it's a discount or an upgrade fee or something like that. But I don't know how Joe's handling that.
Okay. Well, there's so many great things. I mean, we've just scratched the surface of this book and the things that you cover. And so, folks, if you are interested in getting more out of photos on the Mac or on iOS, by all means, please check it out. Jason, thanks so much for the time. It's great to see you. I always say this, we have to do it more often than just when you get a book out. But,
anytime, just ask.
You're busy,
Make it happen. I'll turn on the lava lamp and we'll have a good time.
That sounds a little strange, but okay, sounds good.
And then photos will remind us of it later.
Yeah, there we go. We have to take some photos to make sure we're reminded of it. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. We will be back with more Take Control authors, I promise you, before the end of the year. Until the next time, thanks for watching.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Mac Voices Facebook group and get more out of your Apple Tech with Mac Voices magazine, free on Flipboard. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us at patreon.com/MacVoices and join these folks who help keep Mac Voices coming to you. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.